Parkinson's, schizophrenia, Tourette syndrome, ADHD and apathy. These conditions all seem completely different, yet they share one underlying feature, an imbalance in the brain's dopamine system. So how can dopamine be the cause of hallucinations in schizophrenia, but at the same time cause tremors in Parkinson's? I mean, none of these illnesses are related to each other. To understand how that's possible, we need to look at what dopamine actually is. Dopamine is a neurotransmitter, basically a chemical neurons use to communicate. But not all neurons use dopamine. Only special neurons in special pathways use dopamine. There are 4 pathways in which dopamine travels in, but we will get to that later. Now this right here is a dopaminergic neuron. It creates dopamine. This area right here is called a synapse. It's where 2 neurons connect to each other. The dopaminergic neuron sends an electrical signal which frees the dopamine into the synaptic cleft. Then the dopamine binds to special receptors on the receiving neuron. These receptors are called D1 and D2. When dopamine is attached to the receiving neuron, it basically regulates that neuron's signal, telling it to slow down or increase signaling. Basically, dopamine is just a modulator for neuronal signals. But dopamine can have very different outcomes depending on which pathway it takes. As I said earlier, dopamine travels along special pathways, mainly 4 different ones: the nigrostriatal pathway, mesolimbic pathway, mesocortical pathway, and tuberoinfundibular pathway. Dopamine's function remains the same in each pathway, but the outcome is very different. The first pathway, called the nigrostriatal pathway, connects the substantia nigra to the striatum. These 2 parts regulate movement. The substantia nigra regulates which movements to make, and the striatum fine-tunes it. Basically, let's say you want to move your hand. The prefrontal cortex sends a signal to the striatum. Then, the substantia nigra tells the striatum whether this movement should be initiated or not. It does this by sending a dopamine signal. If the movement is acceptable, the striatum fine-tunes it and decides which muscles to be used. Dopamine is essentially used as a good-to-go signal, indicating whether a movement should or should not be initiated. Now, this is exactly why when there's a dopamine imbalance in this system, you either get Parkinson's or Tourette syndrome. If there is way too much unregulated dopamine, movements that shouldn't be initiated are executed. This is when you get Tourette syndrome. But if there's too little dopamine, the striatum has a hard time initiating movements, and you get Parkinson's. And this is precisely how Parkinson's treatment works. It increases dopamine synthesis, which restores motor functions, and Tourette's medication works in the opposite way. It decreases dopamine synthesis, which reduces the tics. The second pathway is called the mesolimbic pathway. It connects the ventral tegmental area, that's this area right here, to the nucleus accumbens. The ventral tegmental area is pretty much just a bunch of dopaminergic neurons that create dopamine. It then sends dopamine to the nucleus accumbens and some other limbic regions. The nucleus accumbens regulates mainly 3 things: reward, motivation, and learning. Everything works together like this. Let's say you eat a piece of chocolate. The ventral tegmental area sends a dopamine signal to the nucleus accumbens. Dopamine activates neurons in the nucleus accumbens, which basically indicate that this chocolate is important. The nucleus accumbens then processes this signal as a reward, which is why you feel happy. Then, the nucleus accumbens, based on the reward, decides if this chocolate should be consumed again. Then it reinforces the behavior depending if it was rewarding or not. In this pathway, dopamine pretty much gives value to stuff. It marks what's important and what's not. Dopamine itself isn't responsible for pleasure, instead it just gives a signal to whether something is important. This is exactly why out of millions of people you have seen, you remember precisely your parents, friends and coworkers' faces. For example, every time you look at your friend's face, the ventral tegmental area sends a dopamine signal indicating that this person is important. Then, the nucleus accumbens processes this and sends it over to the hippocampus, which stores the face for long-term memory. While when you see a stranger's face, no dopamine is transferred and thus you don't remember their face. A dopamine imbalance in the mesolimbic pathway causes schizophrenia and hallucinations. It might sound confusing as to how dopamine is related to hallucinations and schizophrenia, but it actually makes sense. See, someone with schizophrenia has an unregulated dopamine increase specifically in this pathway. As I said earlier, dopamine here works as a signal that indicates importance. So now when there's an unregulated increase of dopamine, random thoughts, random noises, random people are all tagged as highly important. This makes the brain really confused. So what does the brain do? It makes up fake stories, hallucinations, and fake explanations as to why these thoughts, noises, and people are important. Imagine if random people and random stimuli all get tagged as super important without an explanation as to why. Schizophrenia medication works by blocking dopamine receptors in this pathway, which reduces hallucinations. The third pathway, called the mesocortical pathway, connects the ventral tegmental area to the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is responsible for attention, working memory, and planning. Dopamine signals here make neurons in the prefrontal cortex either more or less sensitive. This helps you focus on stuff and ignore other stuff. I mean, take a look around you. How many different things are you seeing right now? How many sounds are you hearing right now? Maybe cars outside, maybe a plane, but you aren't focusing on that, you're focusing on this video. That's precisely because of dopamine. Dopamine is strengthening the signals you're getting from this video while ignoring all the external stimuli, making you focused on the video itself and less focused on stuff around you. An imbalance in dopamine here leads to ADHD and apathy, which is a lack of motivation. And this is exactly how ADHD meds work. They increase dopamine in the prefrontal cortex, leading you to be more focused on a specific task. The last and fourth pathway is called the tuberoinfundibular pathway. I won't go into deeply about this pathway, but basically it connects the hypothalamus to the pituitary gland. These areas of the brain are responsible for hormone production, and dopamine here can regulate and control hormone release. Dopamine isn't as important in this pathway as the others, but it still regulates some hormones and serves an important role. All of these four pathways have very different outcomes, but dopamine's function remains the same. It regulates neuronal signals, but depending on the area and the amount of dopamine, it can have vastly different outcomes. To say the least, dopamine isn't a feel-good chemical, it's just a neurotransmitter used by neurons to regulate signals.